the way the economy is set up in its structures and the times of day that you're expected to do things, like we're basically asking people to be in 3 different places at once at all times and not get paid enough to pay for your housing and your health insurance and everything else. Like the structures don't work. And I think the thing that social democratic parties, like you were just talking about the Democrats and others, the thing that we have to be so careful of is that we do not become the defenders of institutions that no longer work for people.
Hi, Social Democrats. It's Stephen here. We want to get to know you better. So we've launched the Socially Democratic Listener Survey. It's just 15 quick questions and will only take about 3 minutes to complete, and it's completely confidential. And as a thank you for doing so, anyone who completes the survey will go into the draw to win a trip to Adelaide for the 2026 ALP National Conference, which is happening in July this year, including return domestic flights and accommodation. If you are from Adelaide, then we're going to fly you to Melbourne for one of our live shows leading up to the Victorian state election. To take part in this listener survey, just click the link in this episode's show notes and let us know everything that is important to you in terms of your podcast, Socially Democratic. Thanks. The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people and organisations who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in your world in 2026, then hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members. If you want to join those wonderful supporters of our podcast and financially support our show so we can continue to produce great episodes each week, then we encourage you to click on the link in the show notes and subscribe to the Patreon of Socially Democratic. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. For over a century, Maurice Blackburn has stood up for fairness, championing the rights of everyday Australians and shaping landmark legal reforms. Today, they're harnessing new technologies to make justice more accessible, more efficient, and more responsive to the needs of modern Australia. All right, let's get on with today's episode. We are taping this one on a wet, damp Monday night on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. Nice to be home, though. It is a delayed Mailbag episode. It was meant to be last week. I was up in the Blue Mountains doing a full week workshop on organising workshop with FIFPro, actually, which is the global union that represents professional footballers. I was absolutely in my element. And I just bit off more than I could chew, and we didn't get a chance to record it. So we're doing a little bit late, and I appreciate our two guests being so flexible to rearrange this. And let me introduce our two guests. She was the former Chief of Staff to Daniel Andrews, now is a Managing Partner at Foster, McCrone, Ratcliff and Sims Advisory. Lissie Ratcliff, wonderful to see you again.
Hey, Stephen.
And he is the Director of Campaigns and Strategy at Unions New South Wales. And I've got to say, Todd, Blue Mountains, who knew? Beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, it's some of the most gorgeous parts of New South Wales. Did you get a bushwalk in?
No, didn't leave the hotel at all.
It's still pretty good. The pubs are great too.
So they say. I literally didn't leave the hotel, but I looked out the window and it looked amazing.
All about the
Absolutely
view.
Spectacular. Yeah.
So,
and Labor territory.
What isn't? What isn't these days? So we've got, for those of you who have never listened to a Mailbag episode, we ask our loyal, dedicated listeners on Patreon to send through some questions or topics or things that they would keen for us to discuss. And then we select the best of them and we put them to our two wonderful, esteemed guests to have a bit of a chat about. The first one comes from Andrew. Andrew simply asks, do we think the coalition parties will learn from the Liberal Party review or just doing what they are doing? We've been very excited about the Liberal Party releasing their review. We got pretty excited in the last Mailbag episode. It's finally come out. I think the Prime Minister actually tabled it in question time for all to read. So we appreciate our Prime Minister doing a good deed for us all. Todd, what do you think? Will the Liberal Party learn from this review or just keep making the same mistakes?
One hopes not. But look, from present evidence, you'd imagine that they probably won't learn too much from the review. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I mean, the first one is, like any good review, like sunlight isn't a good disinfectant. The fact that such lengths had been gone through to prevent this review ever being published, ever being shown, except for the actions of some brave Liberal Party member out there somewhere who has clearly dropped this off somewhere. For any good review to have impact, it needs to be well read, not sitting in, say, like the top drawer of some official's office. And so the fact that it had been hidden, I think, demonstrated there probably wasn't a great sense that people were keen to do a proper review of this. The fact that so much of the content of the review clearly was about point scoring. Like there's a lot of great quotes in the review, but my favorite in particular is that while every submission criticised the actions of other decision makers and provided examples, there was a notable absence of reflection on how a decision maker, that is a campaign director, paid official, MP or candidate, could have done better. There was little feedback from these decision makers about their own shortcomings. Like just clearly was just stacks on submissions, just everyone critiquing. As I said, more interest in point scoring than in any attempt to sort of analyze problems. And then maybe the third one that I would point to, like one of the clear themes that's come out of reading the review is that the Liberal Party has a problem in its appeal to women voters. And one of the outcomes of the review being put out is the rolling of its first female leader. Like that's how they've interpreted this in the first instance. I just contrast this so much with the end result of the 2019 federal election, where Labor had a pretty humbling result and went through a very extensive review that was publicly released, that asked some very tough questions, that provided some really sensible recommendations, and was the base and effectively the base for the last two election outcomes and the great work that the National Secretariat, the Leader of the Opposition's office and the state branches were able to pull off, particularly in the last election. If you don't have good reviews that are well read and well considered and public, very hard to learn from your mistakes, particularly if you're trying to sue people to stop anyone reading about them.
Lissie, did you get a chance to I wouldn't have expected anyone to read all of it, but I mean, what's your takeaways from what you've certainly gleaned in the review?
Yeah, look, I haven't read all of it, to be fair, but you kind of couldn't avoid the coverage of it, both the calling of it, the then alleged cover-up of it, and then finally the leaking of it. I think it's fair to say they got more traction with their review than they did with their election campaign. But I think, if I reflect on my time when I was a sort of senior staffer in political jobs, like I had all our previous campaign reviews that were kind of available to me, saved and in some cases in hard copy in the bottom drawer. And they did come out on a fairly regular basis just to kind of, particularly when you're starting to think about, what is the campaign going to look like? Like they are useful. Like some of them are better than others and some of them are more comprehensive than others, but they're there for a reason and they ought not be ideally buried. I do think, and I didn't really think I was going to come to this podcast necessarily in defence of Peter Dutton at any point. However, I do think it is a little bit interesting that, and again, I haven't read it all, so Todd, defer to you if this is an unfair take from the media, but I do think it's a little bit interesting that the whole thing's been nailed to the leader and his office, says she, formerly of a leader's office. But in my experience of several election campaigns, the people who approve the money are the party officials. And they are the ones literally empowered by the party legally to sign the checks for things. So the notion that, Peter Dutton as the leader and his office were running everything and the party officials just couldn't possibly do anything at all. Like there are some things you can't force a leader of a party to do physically, obviously, if they're not willing. And there are some resourcing things you can't force them to do either. But things like the ad buy and the messaging that goes into them and a whole bunch of other things like that, your research program, like, frankly, you hold the purse strings. The decisions, are yours, or at least, Stephen, you're a former party official, jump in here. But I just don't think all of that can be put, no matter how bad Peter Dutton's decision-making was, and clearly it was very bad, you can't nail the entire election campaign outcome to him because he didn't control every part of it.
Todd, does it read like a hatchet job? Is it actually a review or is it a hatchet job?
I think it's a proper review. Like, you do look at it, there are some really sensible recommendations in there. I mean, the very first recommendation there is that the federal leader should never, and their office should never be in charge of the entire campaign, and they need to share responsibility with the party office. To what extent the blame is appropriately shifted to the federal leader's responsibilities relative to the party office, I mean, you'd love to have been a fly on the wall in some of the meetings. And if you do want to get a sense of a fly on the wall, I can highly recommend Nikki Savva's latest book, which also has a whole bunch of people who also are relitigating every decision that was made during the last campaign into that. Like, they read as great companion pieces, Earthquake and the Federal Liberal Review. But yeah, I think it's probably easy to frame the whole review up, particularly in the media coverage, as a hatchet job on Dunn, right? He's carried quite a load of the decisions, particularly a lot of the decisions. But there's a lot, I think, in the review that also makes a point about the policy process coming out of different shadow ministers, a lack of discipline across the shadow cabinet. I mean, in an attempt to get away from any connection with Donald Trump because it was polling terribly, they've got shadow ministers announcing that we're going to make Australia great again. Like, people making policy decisions like the work from home policy, which, just completely compromised a core strength for Dutton as a strong leader on policy. There's a lot of blame to go around in the lead, but I do think it's a proper review. Like, it is well. Like, I think the reviewers have done a decent job of trying to synthesize all of these takes and to try to be quite candid. It's probably I'm sure it's probably a bit of a shame that there's been such an effort to bury all the work that they've gone through, and in an attempt to try to right the wrongs and try to set their party up for the future.
Because reviews are hard. It's hard work. Like, if anyone's ever been a part of a review, like, first of all, I know the experience for the Labor Party after any election, win or lose, it's difficult to get 2 or 3 people to actually step forward and volunteer, because they're not getting paid for it, volunteering their time. And particularly for a national campaign review, you've got to get on a plane and you've got to go travel across all of our states and territories and sit down with a lot of folk, and absorb a lot of information, ask important questions, and then try and collate all that information into a document that is then, to your point, Lissie, is something that then future campaigners, future leaders, future staffers can take and go, oh, okay, these are some of the mistakes we've made in the past. Let's not do that again. Or here are some things that we should be mindful of going into the future. So it's actually a really, really important document. It's interesting you said that, Todd, because I actually did wonder, I thought to myself, the Liberal Party cannot be so up their own arse right now that even their review is just a complete shit show. So I guess to the question that Andrew's asking is, are they going to learn from the mistakes in the past? There are things in the review that suggest that if they do read it and then take up some of those recommendations, that they probably should. Any other thoughts on the review, Lissie?
I think there's, one of the things that I think you can nail to the leader in his office, and certainly the parliamentary side of the party, is the policy development bit, and there's the large part of the review talks about that. And in fact, there's in the version that the Prime Minister has tabled in the Parliament, the only highlighting I can find in the bit that I've read so far is about the work from home policy, where it says memories vary as to who came up with it. It's just a little tick there. But I do think this really gets down to, and we've talked about this before, and I'm sure we will talk about it again, but the guts of the problem facing the Liberal Party, and they've got a bunch about, campaign capability and just general, charisma in their leaders and everything. But really what it gets down to is, who are they for? What are they doing about it? What do they believe? And fundamentally, I think the review does kind of indicate that they did not have a good answer to that question. I would argue they still do not have a good answer to that question. And, now that Matt Canavan's, taken over from David Littleproud for the National Party, which, good on him. But the reality is still, I think, if you listen to Matt Canavan talk and you listen to Angus Taylor talk, they have fundamentally different worldviews about things, and how the Liberal Party can haul itself together into something coherent and then have the further difficult task of then bridging a gap with a National Party which is as populist and protectionist as has probably ever been. I wait with bated breath to see, but I still there are things in this review that they should look at. There are things in this review that the Labor Party should look at and take seriously. But until the Liberal Party can answer that fundamental question, like all of the logistics and the, skills training and everything else, none of it in the end is going to matter if they can't answer, like, who are we here for and what are we doing about it?
I'll come to you in a moment and I'll ask the same question of you, Todd. Lissie, if you were appointed the national campaign director of the Liberal Party, what's one of the very first things that you would do?
Take out a life insurance policy. That's a hard job. I think they've got to take it straight back to basics and not, I would worry a lot less about the architecture and all the other stuff. Like, unless they have a core proposition that they themselves believe in and agree on, that they can then take to the Australian people, like, I almost think the rest of it's a little bit pointless. So, maybe it's, this is going to sound terribly consultant of me, but like it's almost that thing of going out and listen to the voters. That's an important thing, and they should do that, and every party should do that after it's lost an election, because that's that's an important part of working out what went wrong. But I think they all need to just sit in a room together and look at each other and say, like, why are we together? And then I think they need to ask themselves the hard question of, if there's not actually enough overlap in that, well, maybe they don't belong together. And some of them have already made that decision and are now members of One Nation. And some people on the other side have just left the party and given up and said, well, I haven't changed, but the Liberal Party has, and that's not my party anymore. So I don't envy the people in charge at either the organisational level or in the parliamentary sense, but if they can't form some kind of ideological base to get around, the rest of it's not going to matter, and the Liberal Party won't be here.
Before I go to you, Todd, you remind me there, Lissie, you're right. Like, I don't know if the Liberal Party or the Liberal leadership has actually committed some form of active contrition to the voter. I don't feel like I've ever heard them say, you know what, we got it wrong.
This is why we lost.
Yeah, and now we're listening. We're going to go on a bit of a listening journey, and we want you to be a part of that. Todd, what you get the job at head office? What are you going to do first?
That's a great question. I disentangle myself from the just conservative media apparatus that they are just so driven by. I would just look at the small bubble that they have become representative of. And just to go to Lissie's point, like, I would do the act of contrition. I would go and talk to the voters. I would go and talk to people doing it tough in regional, rural, middle class, Western Sydney. I would go and talk to all these people and realise that for most of these people, it is all material conditions and their way of life and governments helping them, not ones that fight culture wars after dark on Sky over and over again. Like, I would just disentangle myself from just the tail wagging the opposition as a dog. I'd have a good look at continuing that conversation about abandoning the sort of culture war obsession. I'd probably have a good look at anything and everything they can do to improve female and more broadly diverse participation in the party. Like, they have become so white, pale and stale. Like, it is just, if you want to represent multicultural and modern Australia and diverse communities, you have to kind of have candidates from that rather than all entirely from central casting. I said, just drop the culture war, the constant obsession. I just think people in as scary as the world is now, the last thing anyone is looking to politicians to do is to instill with them more fear and more anger and more division and more hatred. And I would join the kind of the broader project that like Labor is doing about trying to rebuild social cohesion and trying to bring people back together and trying to solve the things at the root cause. I'd collaborate with the government where I could. I'd find areas where we're going to say we're going to work together to solve this particular problem because it's in the interest of everyone in Australia that we do, rather than just everything is a fight, everything is conflict. No matter how petty it is, they chase it. I would just, I don't know, it's probably a bit beyond the first term.
But I agree with that. Like, start picking your battles, because I think the other thing that they're currently, that the Liberal Party and the National Party are grappling with is if you're looking for just pure anger and like the system's rooted and I'm not happy about it, then like One Nation and you're kind of on that side of you're on the right of the centre, then One Nation is kind of the pure version of that. And why are you going to go with a light version? Like, they need to actually, they've got to be something different, because there's someone else out there, Pauline Hanson, Barnaby Joyce and friends, who are offering the like unfiltered version of that. So, why would you kind of take the milquetoast version of that? You've got it. They've got to work out what they're for. They've got to work out what they're against. They've got to pick their battles. In some cases, they've got to work with the government, and not to carbon date all of us too much, but like John Howard did do that during the Keating government. So like there is Hawke Keating, I should say. Like there are examples for that where I think it's proven. I mean, Chris Minns would probably be another good one where you can actually build something of yourself, and so that when you do fight, people actually notice.
It sounds like they're going through the lesson that it took us probably a good 15 years to work out as well on our left flank, which was the Labor Party's not going to be successful if we try and out-green the Greens. And right now, the Libs are trying to out one nation. And I'm wondering how long they will go through this fool's errand and then suddenly discover that we've stopped being who actually we are and we're trying to look like someone else. And, there were moments there with Labor where we were looking at the party going, what are we doing here? And I don't even know if it actually happened. I can't think of a particular moment in this journey for us where we reestablished or rediscovered our Labor identity. But things started to turn around for us, I think, in these contests, in these inner city contests, when we just kind of were like, well, this is what we stand for. This is who we are. We're overtly Labor. And maybe it coincided with people getting a bit jaded with the Greens. And maybe at some point in the future, on the right side, voters will get a bit jaded with One Nation. So it's not a complete mirror. But I do think part of it is the challenge that the Libs are or the mistake the Liberals are making right now, to your point, is that they're trying to be One Nation light.
Yeah, I think that's not a bad comparison, Stephen. And I think at least in a Victorian context, I'd say the Melbourne by-election of 2012, which, we had to fight from opposition against the Greens, and we won that by-election against everyone's predictions and, frankly, against the odds 2 years after we'd lost a state election. And we won it campaigning on TAFE, like a Labor issue if ever I found one. And like that was what we campaigned on. It wasn't, sort of so-called inner city issues. Like we won the seat of Melbourne, which particularly back then was what you would consider kind of the heart of, Adam Bandt territory. And yeah, we ran a campaign on TAFE and we won.
Well, watch this space with the Tories and how they're going to deal with One Nation, because that problem is not going anywhere. Thank you so much, Andrew, for that question. That was great. Okay, let's turn to our second question, and it's from Jim. Jim is asking, we all want investment money to stop going into property, and we've obviously talked about that in previous episodes. However, if we start implementing policies that push it out, there needs to be a place for that money to go. Does Australia have attractive businesses or startup businesses for that money to go into? If not, I feel like the money will just go overseas and find a better home with a much better return. And he goes on to say, it seems that Victoria's changing policies to make investment properties harder has just led to investors to jump into properties in other capital cities. I might be wrong, but, that's my thought. Lissie, what do you think about Jim's thoughts on this investment question?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and there's no doubt that the Victorian government's pulled some levers to help kind of try and get more properties back into the first home buyer part of the market rather than the investment class, if you like. And as for where money's going instead, I'm sure some people, and there's certainly plenty of anecdotal evidence about this, that some people have said, well, I'm not going to invest in Victoria, then I'll go and buy, 5 investment properties in Perth or in Brisbane or whatever it might be. And so is some of that happening? Sure, probably. I think there are, which again, I think is not really a problem for anyone in Victoria. It's probably more of a problem for people in Perth or Queensland. But I mean, there are, without wanting to sound like this is not financial advice, I just want to put a disclaimer on this, but there are plenty of places you can invest your money if you want to otherwise. I mean, obviously superannuation, a great Labor invention, is available to everybody. There are all kinds of, share market, which I'm no expert in, but, both here and overseas, there's venture capital, there's private equity, there's all kinds of infrastructure funds. There's lots of different options if people want to do that. I mean, dare I say it, you can put it in the bank in a savings account. Those are things you can do with it that'll earn you money. Interest rates don't seem to be going down anytime soon. So I think the answer to Jim's question, I think, is yes, there are other options. But I do think that fundamentally, and he says this in his question, it is a good thing if fewer properties are owned by kind of property speculators effectively and are instead owned by the people who are going to live in them. I think that would be better. We should push as hard as we can away from the notion that housing's become an asset class instead of somewhere that put a roof over people's heads. And I think actually what would be good is if other states did something similar, because they might start seeing a bit of downward pressure there as well. Because Melbourne is, I think, has the lowest rents of the capital cities, the major capital cities in this country right now. And it's also, and Todd and I were talking about this last week, but it is also vastly cheaper to buy a house in Melbourne right now than it is in Sydney and most of the other capital cities in this country as well. That doesn't mean that people aren't still finding it tough, but it's not as tough as it would have been without some of those policy decisions. So overall, I think there are other options for people. Frankly, for me, even if there weren't, I'd still say that's the right policy decision from the government.
There was an article on the weekend in the AFR and by one of the Teal MPs in Sydney.
Allegra Spender.
It was Allegra Spender, wasn't it?
Yeah. She put out a whole tax white paper, like the former McKinsey consultant that she used to be.
Yeah, exactly. And the article in the AFR sort of started off by going, she put on a McKinsey hat and actually did a bit of work and wrote a white paper. I am not a policy nerd by any stretch of the imagination. And I actually was kind of interested. I ended up reading the damn thing. And I kind of finished, and even the journo that wrote it was quite, I guess he was sort of saying, he or she, I can't remember who the journalist was, but they were saying, this is super interesting. And in some ways, it's kind of opened the door for Jim Chalmers and the government to revisit a lot of the things that actually were in the policy offerings around tax in the 2019 campaign. Yeah. And Allegra Spender has sort of relitigated this in her white paper. And maybe, Lissie, you can sort of talk to the heart of what she was talking about first. But, yeah, I found it interesting. I just sort of thought what I took away from it was like maybe the ideas of the way that we should structure the economy, which were put up in 2019 and got soundly rejected by the electorate, maybe that this ghost isn't actually dead. Maybe there is an opportunity here. I don't know. What do you think? Lissie, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, Stephen. Look, sometimes policies have their time, and sometimes they're put up ahead of their time, and they don't land, and then they come back again at the right time, and they do. But I think it is Allegra Spender is a Teal MP who is the member for Wentworth, which, if we recall, was Malcolm Turnbull's seat. Like that is, and I'll defer to Todd on the ranking of New South Wales Tory seats, but that is a pretty blue ribbon piece of territory traditionally. And there is a very high, there are a lot of people who live in that seat with a lot of money. And I would say that if Allegra Spender, who represents those people, is still willing and able to put this down on the table and say the tax system as it relates to housing is not fair, it is stacked against everyone who's younger or who already hasn't got property, and we need to do something about that. And then to her, I have to say, to her great credit, not only has she done the policy work, she's actually put together a really simple, clear way to communicate the ideas that she's talking about as well. And they're pretty hard to argue with. But if she can put it up in that electorate, then I would say to the government, let's go, guys. And Jim Chalmers is certainly sort of, front-running potential changes to capital gains tax discounts for second and other properties. And so hopefully, that's on the agenda. But maybe there's more on the agenda as well. But what Allegra Spender's put up is basically saying, say you make, $1,000 from superannuation or from wages or from an investment or from something else was the fourth category that I can't remember now because I haven't got it in front of me. But basically, and she says how much tax you'd pay on all of them. And her basic premise is we used to make money by doing things, and now we make money by owning things. And that fundamentally, like, that is a pyramid scheme that cannot last, because it just means there's all these people, like, the gate is shut on them, and that is not sustainable.
And that our tax system is taxing our younger, smaller population to pay for and support our older, bigger, aging population in terms of healthcare and all the other things. And it's really, really expensive, and it's really, really unfair. And the way she framed it that way, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That really makes sense.
Yeah, and she's got a pretty cool little calculator on her website too, which is pretty good. You can see how much you earn and how much you'd get under her plan and all the rest of it. Like, she's done really well. Full credit.
Well, while we're at it, our next question is from CB Paul, and this one's for you, Todd. Sally McManus was interviewed during the week and announced the ACTU was starting a campaign for a 5-week annual leave benefit across the whole workforce under the present economic circumstances. How realistic is this? He goes on to say it's almost 50 years since, a lot of the many European – sorry, he said it's almost 50 years since the last time we made big changes around workers' rights and whatnot. And many European countries have already adopted this a long, long time ago. Todd, talk us through what the ACTU was trying to do here.
Yeah, so there's my understanding there's a NES, the National Employment Standards, are up for review. There's a parliamentary inquiry, and there's a sort of a ongoing debate between employer and employee lobby groups around, or advocacy groups around, I guess, what these standards should be. So the National Employment Standards sort of underpin the sort of the basic industrial rights that every worker is entitled to. There's been a lot of talk about this sort of increase in the annual leave component. I know it's a thing that the SDA, for example, have been doing campaigning on. We've done some advocacy on this as well at New South Wales. But the SDA sort of put it in a frame that a lot of these unions have been doing as well, which I think is really helpful, which is around just the decoupling of productivity and wages over the last sort of like 10 years. We're seeing people working longer hours, doing a lot more work, and not necessarily for much more income. And this is particularly the sort of explosion in unpaid overtime. So the sort of results vary. There's a few different reports that are floating around. The SDU zeroed in on the Australia Institute have done a report that shows that people are doing something like 5.5 to 6 weeks a year of unpaid overtime. So if you clock up all the getting in half an hour early, working through your lunch break, doing a please fix late at night, think about the impact that like work from home has had, where people now effectively live from work because they've got a computer workstation set up and a boss that can contact them on a series of things like Microsoft Teams or others to get onto them. And the right to disconnect does help with that. But effectively the argument the SU is making is that people have been doing all this extra time, giving all this extra availability, but not getting a lot of it back in terms of wages. So maybe it's better to get it back in terms of time. I think the modelling the Australia Institute put together, I think it's going to add something like 2% to the overall employment cost across Australia. But more than that is going to be saved by just the reduction in staff turnover, the reduction in burnout. So maybe going to like zoom right back and think about more the political context. People, it's a very uncertain world, and people are feeling I think I was talking to you, Lissie, about this the other day as well. Like, people are under so much pressure right now, with particularly this recent inflation crisis and peak. People are working longer hours, earning less, not feeling like they have a lot of control. This is the sort of thing that's about giving them back a little bit of a break, like reestablishing the boundaries between work and their time. So I actually think it's a great idea. It's one that I think the National Employment Standards for annual leave haven't been changed since the 1970s. How realistic it is, I don't know. It's really depending on how much ambition the federal government's got in reform in this space. But this could be a classic example of where, talking before about what could the Liberal Party do to signal to working people that they had their back. Maybe endorse this one. Maybe this is the sort of thing that says a signal to working people that actually we're on your side, not just on your boss or your employer's side. For every boss that is going to complain about having to pay for 5 weeks annual leave for their staff, they're also getting that extra week of leave themselves too. So maybe this is a good chance to demonstrate a bit of a change of heart and culture for the Libs as well.
And it goes to the heart of what we've been talking about in previous episodes about offering a meaningful benefit, not vague kind of, policy ideas, but something that's actually tangible. People will go, oh, I've got an extra 5 days of my annual leave.
Material conditions. Like what actually can a government do for you? Well, this is something that is an extra week of time with their families. There's an extra week of time to do that, the bucket list trip. It's some time to put some discretionary funding into tourism and do all these other things. There's all these other economic benefits that we get from people having a bit more time off and actually being having a bit of a break. So, I think it'd be a great thing. I don't know. It's also one of those ones where like I am hearing it more and more. Like when we go like on the weekend, my wife and I to barbecues with family members. It's the sort of thing that I'm hearing from people who are not engaged in politics, who might not be members of unions. Like they've heard about it and they all are talking about what would you do with an extra week a year. Like it's got legs as an issue. But to our point before, if the Libs want to send a signal that they've got to change a heart, this is a great test for them.
I'd shoot myself if the Tories came up with this or pushed this or took the lead on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, disaster.
Oh.
For us, if it came from the other side.
Yeah.
The Libs put it
away.
away. And the employer groups would lose their minds. And what would they do to try to snooker the federal government on it?
Yep.
Well, and this is the thing that if the ACTU and the sort of coalition around it can make a solid argument around productivity, given that's the sort of, buzzword of the moment, and that's something that the federal government is, committed to doing something about, and which the business lobby and everybody else are screaming at them to do something about. Like if you can make an argument in that frame and like Todd, what you said, like less burnout, less turnover, less retraining, so on and so forth. Like if you can make a solid argument in that space, like, yeah.
It's such a thing is, anecdotally, just talking to friends, particularly like friends that are school teachers, long-serving school teachers that have long service leave, or I've got a mate that works in finance and he's been, at the same bank for eons and he's got long service leave. How difficult employers make it just for workers even to access their long service leave and be able to take them in, big slabs. They don't want them going missing effectively for 4 or 5 months or whatever it is when they qualify for after 13 years. Could you imagine what they're like trying to take 5 weeks straight of annual leave? They're going to be screaming. If you had a choice, Todd, between 5 weeks annual leave or a 36-hour week or a 4-day work week, what do you choose? And I won't tell your employer.
You'll have me read it into a podcast, Mike.
This fits in camera.
Yeah, that's just whether he's listening. Mark Maury, if you're listening. I think to be honest, I take the 4-day work week. I think that's another area that unions are doing some advocacy on about rebalancing the productivity benefits, particularly as we're watching sort of like the never-ending onslaught of like redundancies that are coming from AI in workplaces. Like all this productivity benefits that are going to be coming from new technology seems to come only into the hands of employers knocking people off, not into the hands of people having less work and more time. Like if that's not the point of technology, which is to make it, if we can be more efficient and get more done, then we can do less work. Like if that's not the point of the technology, I'm not like, it's very clearly then it's just about driving profits for the owners of the tech. But yeah, I would take a 4-day work week in a heartbeat. Yeah, it'd be so good. I don't know how my wife would feel about us having an extra day a week to spend the whole day together, but maybe it could be good.
I'll come to you in a minute, Lissie. But I when I was in Glasgow a couple of years ago, and it was after I think it's called Fair Monday, which is basically it's a bank holiday in the summer, and it coincides with reasonably good weather. And I was on the bus. If you've ever been in Glasgow and you ride the bus, you're going to have a conversation with someone. Just people on the buses in Glasgow all talk to each other. And there was this guy, middle-aged bloke, just starts talking. Everyone going, how brilliant is it after a long weekend? Everyone's absolutely delighted. The smiles on people's faces and the weather right now, it's absolutely brilliant. And everyone's going, I absolutely love a long weekend. Like the joy that was on this bus because they got 3 days off. Now imagine if you applied that, week after week after week, the joy that people would experience as they come into work going, oh, geez, I am so happy about having that extra day off every week. Lissie, what would you take? 5 weeks annual leave, 36-hour week, or 4-day work week?
So having spent the last 15 years in jobs that just bleed over all of their notional start and finish times, I think I would so this is the thing, my instinct is to say go the 4-day work week. And yet when listening to you just say that, Stephen, every time there is a short week, I just feel absolutely smashed trying to get 5 days work done in 4 days. So I don't know, maybe the concept is not sound. I'm not sure. But my instinct is the extra day off each week kind of gives you the space to, sleep, do all your life admin and do something fun.
Maybe we need to add into the national standards a standard that just says, look, just get done what you can get done in the week.
Todd, can you take that message back to the ACTU?
It's called work to rule. Can we ask, I think it's going to be kind of fun, but can we ask the listeners who submit questions, can we do a poll or something, what they would pick? Because I'd love to dissect what they would pick and why, that we can form a stronger view. Yeah,
that's a good idea. Maybe we'll do one of those polls. We'll do one in Patreon and we'll do one on Instagram where you do the poll thing on Instagram and see what.
And then you can do a socially democratic submission to the National Employment Standards.
Go and appear at the inquiry.
That's great. Do you reckon they'll let me appear?
No, maybe. You could call for Podcasters Day. It could be a new national holiday.
I seek leave.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Very good. Thanks so much, CB Paul, for that great question. Okay, the next one. Okay, this is a long intro, so put your feet up. This one's from Paul, which is different to CB Paul, unless he's got two aliases and he's just been a bit cheeky to get two questions in. But anyway, it is a good question, so it's worth sharing with our guests. He says, I was listening to The Rest is Politics. Apparently that's a podcast. Never heard of it, but anyway. And found their discussion about social cohesion in the United Kingdom pretty concerning. They were basically saying that the UK is becoming less able to make foreign policy based on what is best for the nation and instead becoming more driven by constituency pressures tied to overseas loyalties. For example, if you represent one seat, you have to be pro-Modi. So obviously that would have a high Indian population in that electorate. Or if you represent another, then you've got to be pro-Gaza. Rory also told a story about being advised to campaign in India while running for mayor because it would be more effective than campaigning in parts of the actual constituency. They ended the discussion by more or less saying, yes, it's a concern, but that's just the modern world. And Paul sort of asked the question, I think we need to be clearer that if you come to Australia, as our MP said, please don't bring your foreign conflicts here that then shape our foreign policy. Obviously bring your great food and wonderful customs and traditions that makes our nation so wonderful, but maybe just leave the conflicts at the door. Lissie, what are I think you listened to this episode, didn't you? Because you do listen to this podcast. So what was your take on what Rory and the other guy was talking about?
The other guy being the Labor guy. Yes. No, I do listen to the other podcast, Stephen, obviously just for opposition research purposes. But, yeah, I heard that conversation. I think, and interestingly, they kind of gave a bunch of anecdotal things, some of which you just referenced there, and they kind of didn't land anywhere with it because it's, in some senses, it may be a hard question. Paul, thanks for the question. I'd probably push back on the framing a little bit though, because I think the notion that anyone's foreign policy is some sort of static thing that never changes, I think is probably not right. And, while there are, Australia and other places like the City of London, for instance, are incredibly multicultural places and have a lot of different people who've come there from different places all around the world and are now creating a new kind of community. And, there's some element of the civic kind of infrastructure and shared sensibility that shifts when that happens. The notion that that's a new thing, I think, is not really true, because I think if you look at, just take Australia, for example, for all of the 20th century really, and, quite some time before that, we were taking basically all of our cues around foreign policy and a whole bunch of other things from the United Kingdom, because that was the diaspora that was influencing politics in this country, because that was sort of the majority migration that had happened, at a certain point in time. And then as new waves of migration come of course, those people bring with them their culture, Stephen, as you say, their food, and they bring with them, political sensibilities and an understanding of different kinds of things that might be important to them in different places. I think the thing is not that those things can't all come together and coexist. I think the thing is what is it that, in our case in Australia, we want what are the shared civic institutions and civic ideas that we all want to actually coalesce around, and they aren't going to stay stuck in time forever either, because the things that we all, or a majority of us, agree on now are very different from what we all agreed on in 1950, and that's a good thing. Like, those things, should keep moving. But that social contract, I think, always needs to be there, but what it is can change, and I think that's fine. I do think, though, that puts an onus on the government of the day, or governments as the case may be, and to my point before maybe about the opposition, about political leaders in general, have a role in talking about and telling a clear story and making it a compelling one about what kind of country do we want to be and what are those shared values we want to have and what does that actually mean in practice. And when you've got political leaders who are off kind of doing the opposite of that, instead of trying to put people together, they're trying to drive people apart, well, I think then you do end up in a pretty difficult place where people are pulling in totally different directions. And then when social cohesion breaks, then you do get some pretty in some cases, some pretty dangerous outcomes. So I don't think it's a new thing. I think it's really just about, what does largely our leaders do about it and how they take it.
I'm curious as to whether or not both the hard left and the hard right tactically want that temperature turned down. I think it serves in their best interests that the temperature is turned up. We had late last year, at some point there was those anti-immigration rallies here in the central business district of Melbourne. And so all the anti-fascist campaigners came out on the same day. And so you had this confrontation literally in the streets with the police separating the two of them and creating – and there was a tension in the city that day. And I kind of was looking around and seeing just folk who were going about their day-to-day lives in the city on a Sunday to go shopping and looking at their reactions. And it was bewilderment by those people. They were looking at these two mobs yelling at each other and carrying on. I don't think either – I just wonder – I don't think either of them want to turn the temperature down. I think they want the temperature to get higher and higher because it heightens and draws attention to their particular messages. And they're feeding off of each other, and they want that fight. I don't know, and I don't know how to hose that down. Like, I think that's a challenge for the Prime Minister. He's calling for this temperature to be turned down, but I don't think either side is listening and want to heed his calls.
It's conflict as a recruitment strategy.
Yeah.
I'm sure both those sides that you saw, kind of, with the with the police down the middle of them, were pretty happy with the outcome that day.
Yeah, and I think that they feed off of each other and they rely on each other. You used to talk about the reason why the Celtic and Rangers is called the Old Firm was because actually they profited off the rivalry between the two. The two clubs actually played it up to their fans, and the fans got really more and more angry and agitated about this sectarian divide. And so therefore, in the end, they were making more money out of it. And in this case, it's not people making money. In this case, it's actually growing and bringing more people into their fold and building their actual human capacity to then try and create change in the other areas, and which is, I assume, the far right obviously want to have electoral success. Maybe the hard left want to have electoral success, but also change policies and impact the direction that our country heads. And that worries me as a social democrat.
Well, we're a country that's always largely because of compulsory voting. Like the extreme edges have never been able really to grab hold of the body politic en masse. And this is kind of probably the first time we're seeing a party that we would probably all regard as being on the fringes in One Nation as polling, 20+%, not in a couple of seats, but in every state across the country and nationally. So that is a different thing than we've seen before, and none of us know whether that's going to come through as real in an election. But it's definitely territory that I don't, like, at least to my knowledge, we've not been in that way before.
Good segue to our final question, which actually was sent to me by a listener, but privately, and said, Stephen, I'm keen to get the Lissie and Todd's thoughts on this. So it was a Substack article or piece written by a former colleague of mine, actually, back in the days of Victorian Labor's headquarters. He was a fellow assistant secretary with myself, Kos Samaras, who now heads up a lobbying firm and a polling company called Redbridge. And the first thing I want to say before we sort of move into this conversation is that I think it's actually really good that Kos writes this stuff. He's a prolific writer and a thinker, and is always trying to understand and question where politics is going. And I think that ideas and debates are actually what make our side stronger. And we shouldn't limit these sort of conversations just to like party conferences and branch meetings. So I'm going to bring his words into this podcast and share it, and let's have a bit of a conversation about it. And I think that's going to be good for our broader movement going forward. The piece is titled "The Death of the Brahmin Left, the Vegemite Version in Victoria." And in it, he argues that the centre-left parties globally have in Western democracies have shifted from representing the working class to being dominated by an educated professional elite, also named the Brahmin Left. That term comes from a French writer called, is it Thomas Piketty?
Yes.
Yeah. And everyone has a copy of that book on their bookshelf. No one's read it, but it looks really impressive because it's very, very, very thick. As a result, many working class voters no longer feel represented and are drifting towards the populist right movement. And he suggests Australia delayed this shift by replacing parts of Labor's old working class base with multicultural outer suburban voters, but warns that this coalition that Labor's vote has been based on may be starting to fracture as well. And there's actually, and I want to have a broader conversation. He talks about Victoria, but I think this applies to Australia nationally. But the first thing I was keen to get Lissie's thoughts on, there's a paragraph in here that I want to share with you, Lissie, and it says, Labor's internal read that leaning further into the professional classes, the teal-adjacent inner suburbs, and the values-driven knowledge economy vote would compensate for whatever softness existed on the outer flank, was a bet that has now comprehensively failed. The architects of this strategy are mostly no longer around, but those left behind have to confront a serious problem. The party is down 25 points from that high at the 2022 Victorian state election. The substitution strategy has run its course. Lissie, I just want to get your thoughts on that. The architect, he quotes, the architect of this strategy are mostly no longer around. I'm wondering if he means perhaps former Premier Daniel Andrews and maybe some of his colleagues at the cabinet. You were the Premier's chief of staff. Was it, just get your sense, was it intentional to focus policy on growth in places like inner Melbourne and the progressive middle class suburbs, and that it would offset any decline in the outer Labor suburbs in our heartland, such as the western northern part of Melbourne? Was that an intentional thing?
So, Stephen, I can say as someone who, as you say, was there at the time in 2022, both before, during and after that election, the answer to that is no. And I don't make a habit of speaking for party office, given I've always worked on the other end of things. But in this case, having spent an excessive amount of time probably with the campaign director for that election, both before, during and after, I think I can say on his behalf as well also no. That doesn't actually reflect either the campaign strategy that we put together. It doesn't reflect the seats that we won at that election, and it doesn't reflect the policy agenda we put up. I think either in the years preceding 2022 or in 2022 itself. The notion, first of all, that there is only one way to represent what he terms working class communities or working class voters, and that is hard infrastructure, I think is not right. I think there is a responsibility to build the infrastructure, whether it's schools, hospitals, transport, whatever it might be that communities need. And the current Labor government, under both its former and current Premier, have done and are doing a lot of that. And that is a good thing that they have done that and that they continue to do that. And And a lot of that happened in the outer suburbs and some of it happened in other places. But that's as you would expect because people live everywhere and they all need infrastructure. But there is another way that you do those things, and it is through service. It is through the actual service delivery, and it is through policy decisions around things like industrial relations and working conditions, and things like criminalising wage theft or introducing free TAFE, which everybody should remember. As much as it is a national program now, it started in Victoria, and programs like that, and initiatives like that, and policy thinking like that is squarely targeted not at this, inner city educated kind of progressive left, as it is often spat, but in fact at people who are in those outer suburban areas and regional areas and who maybe aren't going to go to university but do want to learn a trade. The thing that I think the Victorian government has grappled with over successive governments, not just the current one, is how to keep up with what has been an absolute explosion of growth and population growth in those corridors. And I'm sure there are plenty of people in those areas, and I live in one of those local government areas, who feel like there's not enough and that things haven't kept up. And that's completely understandable. But the reality is when you are dropping the equivalent of a regional city into those growth corridors every few years, it is almost impossible to build fast enough of everything all the time. That is not evidence of a lack of effort or a lack of intent. It is just evidence of how hard it is to keep up. And I think I do think that is an important distinction to make, because I think what Kos is talking about is alleging, I guess, is a conscious decision to say that those people do not matter, and instead the party turns towards the inner city and this kind of notion of a cultural elite. And I do not think that the policy record of the Victorian government in this current incarnation, I don't think that stacks up.
The thing that I found interesting about it, this idea of working class and these particular communities, and he sort of tracks it over 20 years. Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane and even Adelaide, these cities have fundamentally changed in those 20 years. The types of people that you would declare as being working class 20 years ago and who they are and what they look like, I think demographically probably is a lot different to what it is now, and the density of those electorates as well has also changed. Kos does talk a lot, not just in this particular Substack article he wrote, but over the course of as long as I've known him as well, because he is from that part of the community. He is from Broadmeadows and lives up in that area still. It's been his home, and so he's always talked about the north and the west as this sort of working class Labor heartland. But I think when you think about the makeup of those types of communities, they're not too dissimilar to the other growth corridor in Melbourne, which is the southeast. And those are the seats like the Narries, or Narre Warren South and Narre Warren North, Dandenong, Frankston, Carrum, Cranbourne. And I have always, in my own head, when I've heard Kos talk about this, kind of grapple with it in my own mind because of the what we see electorally happen in the southeast versus what we're seeing electorally happen in the northwest of the city. And I actually just did a bit of sort of the back of an envelope tracking of the Labor Party primary in seats up in the northwest of the city and then seats in the southeast of the city. And going back 20 years, so 2022, all the way through to 2002 to 2022, so 20 years, the core seats in the southeast, which have transitioned from being a white working class community to a migrant working class community over this period, have shown a modest decline in the Labor primary vote, roughly between 4 and 6 points over that 20-year period. It's roller coasted a bit because obviously we've won elections and lost elections, but broadly speaking, there's been a 4 to 6% shift in that. If you compare that then to the north and west, the picture looks more dramatic because we're seeing shifts of, like, say, Broadmeadows has gone from a 68% primary to a 47% primary. You just think, oh my God, that's catastrophic. It's fallen off a cliff. But actually, the cliff falling actually happened between the 2018 and the 22 election, where our primary in the seat of Broadmeadows went from 68. So in 2018, our primary in 68 was higher than what the primary was 2002. We've actually increased our primary in the 18-year period or 16-year period, and then it fell off a cliff in 2022. And one of the reasons is the Victorian Socialists ran a really good campaign and picked up between 8 and 15 percentage points off the Labor primary, and you can replicate that across a number of seats in the northwest. And so, what I would want to add into Kos's analysis, if you could, because I want to be perfectly clear. This is a campaign podcast. And you've heard us say this on the show before, and we stole it from a good friend of ours, Janae Wartell in the United States, who's always said to me, Stephen, demographics isn't destiny. There is such a thing as a campaign effect. I'm a campaigner. I've always believed in actually campaigning and making a persuasive argument to voters. And it's not just a case of, well, the demographics are going this way, so that's lost. How you're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. And campaigning is actually a part of the solution. And I think that what we're seeing here is that campaign effect has to be added into this conversation. What I want to be clear here is I'm not shitting on North and Western MPs and saying they're not working hard. But what I am saying is that the MPs in the Southeast have always, because their margins, like Cranbourne, the primary vote in 2002 was 53%. So it's always been hovering at a lower rate. And maybe the attitude to those MPs is, shit, we could lose this one day. So therefore we're bringing a different attitude and have consistently been doing that over each election cycle. So much so that Pauline Richards, the MP for Cranbourne, has only seen a drop in her primary of a couple of points. So I just want to re-emphasise that actually campaign effect does actually have a big impact in this, and it's not just demographics. Is Labor's primary falling across all of those areas? Yes, but not to the numbers that I think Kos is making out, and that's also where I'd want to push back on.
Yeah, and I think I'd maybe add, I agree with that, Stephen. I'd maybe add to that. I think if you look at places like, Wyndham, for listeners not in Victoria, sort of in the western suburbs, and then Melton, sort of, which is kind of more in the northwest, but kind of two big areas that are examples of that. Like the demographic shift of people. So traditionally, if you go back to sort of your 2001-ish territory, you've got a vast majority of people who are speaking only English at home and are from a kind of, some kind of Anglo background. And then you fast forward 20 years and that is no longer the case. And it is in fact almost a majority the other way, where you've got people from all over the world speaking lots of different languages at home, certainly not only speaking English. But we can't treat, and we shouldn't treat, those people as one homogenous block either. Like the multicultural community is not a community. It is lots of different communities from different places, and kind of to the the discussion we were having earlier. And it is, I think you can't say that those people have left Labor. In many cases, those people have never been with Labor because they or their families have only just arrived here with no political affiliation in this Australian context whatsoever, which is perhaps different than if you go back several decades and you're talking about, for instance, the Italian community or something, which has had decades to kind of become very affiliated with the Labor Party, and there's a whole range of reasons for that. And I think that the notion that the party is, has been sort of taken over by this educated professional class, well, I would probably challenge anyone to find any developed country in which all of the people who work both for the party and in the government are not in kind of white-collar, higher than average paying jobs. Like that is the definition of politics now everywhere. I think it matters less. I think that matters less than having a different collection of people who've come from different places. Like Bob Hawke was a Rhodes Scholar. It did not stop him putting Medicare on the table for this country and making sure it got done. By contrast, Paul Keating didn't finish high school and never went to university. And they are the two great icons of the Labor Party in the modern era, with fundamentally different educational backgrounds, both brilliant, and both whom, when they got in the rooms where it actually mattered, made good decisions and did something with their power that improved the lives of working people in this country. And I think the notion that you can't be for the Labor values and the Labor Party because you live in the inner city or you live in the outer suburbs. Like that's not, I don't kind of think that's the point. It's about what are we doing with our power to make people's lives better. And I think that, you know, people who support Labor or people who support the Labor Party, for me, I would like us to spend more time thinking about what does that offering look like to people? What are the problems and the challenges that people are dealing with in this, frankly, chaotic, wildly changing world? And what are the rules that don't work anymore that we need to throw out and we need to change? Because that is what the Labor Party has always been about. That is the point of us. I do think that Kos has a little bit kind of declared the end of this Victorian government before the elections even started.
Todd, I just want to get your thoughts about Kos's broader thesis and its application with your experience in New South Wales. Obviously, New South Wales is a different state as well, but it has Labor heartlands. It's got traditional voting blocks. Do you foresee that there is a problem with the relationship that the party has with these traditional voting blocks and that it's under threat, or that we're beholden to this sort of inner city social elite?
Yeah, I mean, I think few people would give that criticism of the Minns Labor government, that it's been beholden to the inner city in any sort of progressive elites in any way. I mean, what I think Kos is touching on is a sort of perennial conversation that happens, particularly in New South Wales Labor, and has been happening for a long time, particularly in our years in the wilderness, about how are we going to be a party to an electorate like Summerhill, which is in the sort of the inner west inner city, to a place like Penrith or Camden, which is on the outer suburbs, as well as some of these heartland seats we have in these sort of outer regional or rural areas. So like Newcastle's, Port Stephens, Maitland, South Coast or Kiama, and down in Wollongong. Like it's a constant debate about how we could be all things to all people. But you now look quite comfortably at where the government is at the moment, where it's holding, you know, some of those seats, all those seats that I've just mentioned, by building a sort of coalition of voters around a very clear message about things they were going to do. And to Lissie's point about, you know, less focus on where are the demographics and where do they live, but more about who are our people and what are we going to do for them, and what are we going to do with the levers of power if we get our hands on them, and what are we going to invest in. I mean, to Kos's point about the people who end up on the outskirts of the Sydney Basin, and the quality of services that they suffer, I think that's a real consideration for this government. Like, you know, in the 12 years of the Libs, where it was just doubling down on urban sprawl, which the answer to all housing problems was just to build another suburb on another outskirts. You know, this government's attempted to try to rebuild density, particularly in the west and around the transport corridors, so that it's not the outer suburban areas that have to carry the infrastructure, have to carry the housing load without the infrastructure backup. The government's made a lot of noise, made a lot of commitments and investments in public services, not just in the infrastructure like new hospitals and new schools, but also in the public services that provide the human infrastructure. So, you know, they took a pretty brave position in the last election, getting rid of the public sector wages cap, which is a strong fiscal argument that Conservatives mount with respect to the public sector wages cap. This government said we'll do away with that, and we're going to wear some of the industrial difficulties that come with having to negotiate with its own workforce, rather than just kicking that all the way to an accountant in terms of responding on wages. So, to the point that I think Kos is, so that broader point that he's making, I just think that's been very much on the minds in New South Wales. That being, I also take the point, there's a lot of way to go, and particularly the point that he raises about in these communities that have been suffering, that are feeling disconnected, that are now turning to One Nation, you know, where all eyes are turning to South Australia this weekend, right, to see what the results are there. I'll be watching very, very closely to Victoria, and we'll be watching even closer when it comes up to New South Wales. It's a real question about what does some electoral success for One Nation do? Does it's in the way that it has previously? Does it spell sort of that's sort of the high point it comes down, or does it give broader license to the views that they do, the views that they hold, and the position they have? So, proof will be in the pudding. As I said, also just to the point, I'm a big reader of a lot of Kos's content, and I do welcome just having more people in the Labor Party and the Labor movement say what they think out loud and submitting it to public debate. That's the entire point of this conversation. We're a better party for it. We're not the party that, as I was making the point before, we don't take our hot takes and hide them in electoral reviews and then sue anyone who tries to publish them, you know?
and wait for our opposition party to table it in the parliament.
There was one thing I did agree with what Kos wrote was his observations about the disconnect that social democratic parties in Europe and the Democrats in the United States have with key voting blocs. And I've said on the show before, when I've gone over there, I particularly in Europe, I worry about the severing of the institutional relationship between the party and organised labour. I remember speaking to someone in one particular country, and I said, and I was actually just coming from my own mindset of a former organiser for retail workers. I said, how strong is your union? I mean, obviously retail is one of your biggest industries, biggest service industries in this country, right? Yeah. And they go, yeah, absolutely. Like you got Maccas everywhere and whatever, how strong is that union and what relationship do you have with that union? And they didn't even know the name of the union, and they're a senior person in the party. We still have that connection here and through multiple different unions, and that's a godsend for us. But I don't want us to sit on our laurels and go, we're so much better than the other lot. But so there's a structural problem, I think, that some of the social democratic parties have overseas. But also there's a campaign effect problem as well. They're not running great campaigns. If you look at their offering to the electorate, it's vague policy ideas. It's not meaningful, tangible benefits, or whatever the phrase you used earlier, Todd. Same with the US. Like the Democratic campaign that they ran last year for Kamala Harris was just vague stuff. They had more success in the House races because local candidates running in districts were actually taking to their electorate, meaningful benefits about making their lives better, and therefore they had better success. But at the top of the ticket level, the Democratic campaign wasn't really offering anything. And I think that we, Labor, struggle when we go to a campaign and go, we can get this or that, or yeah, we believe in better housing, or we believe in better health, but not actually able to say, well, no, this is actually how it's going to transpire in your particular electorate indeed. And I've been looking at Mally's campaign, and I'm seeing meaningful benefits come out of their campaign. They did some stuff this week that I was like, it was a good ad. It was a good short ad about these are the things that you want to get under a new Malinowskis government if it's re-elected. I was like, that warms my heart. I think they're in a good space. The minute we stop doing that, then we don't have a good campaign. Then we're in trouble, regardless of this demographics of destiny thing. That's what worries me the most as a campaigner.
Yeah, and I think Stephen, part of what I agree with that, and I think part of what's important in a campaign is being able to diagnose the problem. And I'd say in this case, I don't think it is that Labor has abandoned the working class. I think the problem is the economy has stopped working for most people. The way the economy is set up in its structures and the times of day that you're expected to do things, like we're basically asking people to be in 3 different places at once at all times, and not get paid enough to pay for your housing and your health insurance and everything else. Like the structures don't work. And I think the thing that social democratic parties, like you're just talking about the Democrats and others, the thing that we have to be so careful of is that we do not become the defenders of institutions that no longer work for people. And I think that where parties are really in trouble, I think that is exactly what you're seeing, because you get these reactionaries coming in from the far right who say that the institutions are all bankrupt and everything else. And then the tendency from the left, I think, can be to sort of lock knee and say, well, we have to defend the institution against that attack, without saying, well, hang on, is the institution actually working? And maybe we don't need to burn it to the ground like they're suggesting, but it does need to be fixed.
Now, before we wrap up, Gus, you asked a question about Labor Party and reinvigorating its branches. It's a great question. We're not going to answer it today. Because when we do our live show at the Fringe for the ALP National Conference in Adelaide, that is going to be one of the things that we're going to be talking about. So we're saving that because that's a great conversation to have. And I think Todd is going to join us in that show to talk about that, because Todd's got a lot of experience in party membership and reinvigorating branches. That's not coded for branch stacking. He genuinely actually does this work. Okay, I just want to be clear on that.
We do have some ideas in the works, yeah.
Yeah, very good. Okay, that's it for another show this week. Just a couple of things also note. I think there's a bunch of episodes we're dropping this week. because I think we're also dropping our International Women's Day episode. We had Benita Kolovos from The Guardian. We had Rebecca Thistleton, who's the candidate running South Barwon. And we had Melissa Donnelly, who's the National Secretary of the CPSU, on the show in our annual Mike Handover. That's dropping at some point this week. I'm not entirely sure when. Plus, obviously, there's this episode. Plus, we've got our final South Australian election weekly recap before people go and vote on election day. That'll be dropping this week as well. We're recording that on Wednesday night, so we're hoping to get that one out Thursday evening. So you've got enough time to watch it before polls close. And then obviously next week we've got the post-election recap, which will be just a glorious celebration for the Labor Party. I'm looking forward to that episode with Hannah McLeod and with Matt Clemo. You need to fill out the survey. If you haven't filled out the survey, fill out the survey. The link's in the show notes. Please do, because we're about to announce the winner of that, which is a trip to Adelaide to join us for our 2 live shows at the ALP National Conference. But if you're from Adelaide, you get a trip to Melbourne to come to our one of our Fanny Files with Jesse McCrone live. So much happening. And also happy St. Patrick's Day for tomorrow, even though you're listening to this on a Friday. Todd Pinkerton, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you, Stephen. It's great to be here. Thank you.
And Lissie Ratcliff, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thanks, Stephen.
Have a great week, everyone. Hey, Social Democrats. Thanks for listening. Today's episode was hosted by myself, Stephen Donnelly, and produced by Grace Eyre. If you like the show, please rate us and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really like the show, then join our Patreon community for early and ad-free access to each episode. We regularly take questions and comments from our Patreon members, so get in there if you want to have your say. And finally, get all the latest updates and bonus content by following Socially Democratic on our social media channels. The links are in our show notes. See you next Friday.